because this is when we have your pictures and issues that you've submitted, and we really try to stump Matt and Mike and then put them through their paces to see, what's going on in our gardens and landscapes all across the state. And we're going to jump to that in just a minute. But of course, I'm Charlotte Glen. I'm the state coordinator for the Extension Master Gardener program. And I just have a quick announcement before we move into the main part of our program. And also want to encourage everybody, of course, to hang on till the end, because we'll have some really exciting Extension Master Gardener program announcements that Caroline Richardson's going to share. So we want to give a quick shout out and congratulations to the Extension Agent in New Hanover County, Matt Colligan, and his Extension Master Gardener volunteers who have established a really exciting program called Nature at Home. It is a certification program where local residents can go through a training class and then put certain practices in place in their yard and have it certified as kind of a backyard habitat or wildlife habitat. And they were recently recognized for this program by the National Association of Counties. They were given an achievement award in the volunteer category. So congratulations to them. And they've got more information about that program on their county extension website. And we hope to organize an opportunity for them to share it with everyone across the state sometime in the near future. So very big congratulations to them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Bertone and Mike Munster. Of course, Matt Bertone is the director of the NC State Plant Disease and Insect Clinic and entomologist extraordinaire. And Mike Munster is the plant disease diagnostician extraordinaire. And we're really excited to see what's been submitted and to hear what is going on or what might be the issue or what additional information would have been needed to diagnose.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, we always love this session too, because we love seeing what you're seeing out there. We also like being stumped, also like, figuring out what's going on. But let me start sharing. And so to start off with though, so your photos, we will attempt to diagnose the source of the issue from your photos, but note that some or many may not be resolved from photos alone. Again, we also focus on diagnosis, not control. So if your questions are about control, we may or may not be able to answer that. So just be patient with us. But again, diagnostics, identifying the cause is the first step in proper management. We also tried our best to fit your photos in, but sometimes they need to be cropped, etc. Also only fixed some grammar. So I'm sorry if there's misspellings and other things in the notes, then that's, not on us, unfortunately. Furthermore, we will be comment on the quality of the photos for diagnosis. Please welcome these critiques in order to provide better images to your county offices and us. So, taking the photos and providing good photos is, good key step in, submitting images. And to reiterate, the clinic will diagnose image samples for free, but we will also let you know if we can't diagnose them from the images alone. So yes, mirroring what Charlotte says, thank you to everybody who submitted photos. There were so many great photos, and honestly, I will say I have very few critiques about the photos themselves. They were all really excellent. So, but whether we can figure out what's in them or not is another question. So I'm going to drive the bus, and Mike and I are going to comment on these, and we will start now. So the first one. Let me see if I can get, sorry, it's a little slow. Okay, cool. So here's the first one. So maple tree in Moore County, stunted growth, over 50% of the tree. Last year was first full year planted, have leaves and branches. These photos were taken. The tree definitely does not show recovery from what have been environmental factors, late freeze. Yard is healthy and well cared for. No pesticides have been used. So Mike, do you want to chime in on this?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. And again, thanks to everyone who contributed. Excuse me, I should have brought some water in here. The sad fact, just let me mention, is that a lot of these things, and I'm not going to be able to tell exactly what's going on, but in this particular case, I've got a pretty good idea. And unfortunately, because of the time limit here, we're not going to really be able to dialogue with the folks who submitted, because I would want to ask some more questions here. One of those being, says no pesticides have been used, but I don't know if the person was considering herbicides to be a type of pesticide, which they are, and also what time scale they were thinking, because this to me looks very, very much like herbicide damage. And it could have been from exposure. We don't know. You'd have to sometimes, I'm not the expert in this, Joe Neal is, but you'd have to look at possibly exposures that happened last year even. Notice that it says this year that this began in early spring, so that small buds that never break, the clusters of shoots like that, that is a very suggestive symptom on many hosts for herbicide injury. Now, the big three groups that we have trouble with in our home landscapes are glyphosate, of course, because it's so common and so widely used. Usually that's a problem when you get some kind of a spray drift situation. Also, with a lot of even with the glyphosate products, now they're mixing in some other herbicides that have soil activity. They're in the category called ALS inhibitors. And so those can actually be taken up by roots and cause this sort of symptom. So that's the other group you have to worry about. And then the third group that we often see as a culprit in these herbicide damage situations is the synthetic auxins, like 2,4-D and its relatives. So there you may have some kind of a spray drift situation, or there are even cases where it's brought in on, let's say, mulch or manure, because a few of those compounds are very slow to break down in the environment. And they will stay viable. Viable is not the word, is it? Active in even those materials, and then they're applied on the garden and cause damage. So go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, that a long way of just saying those are the kind of scenarios that we see in the groups of we see. I couldn't tell you which exactly this was. That doesn't look like a synthetic auxin type, but I couldn't tell you if this is ALS. That would seem to be a possibility. I see there was a question, does Roundup brand include those ALS inhibitors? Well, so Roundup is a brand and Ortho is a brand. So you actually have to look at the list of active ingredients in any particular product.
Yeah, I will say also, just to head everything off, we're not going to really have time to discuss anything here, like with people. So, and even for questions, we have I think almost 40 submissions. So we're going to try and get through this fairly quickly. So any follow-ups you have about your specific samples, we'd like to hear about later on, or if you want to email us or let us know. But we're going to have to, in order to get everybody's get everybody through this, I think we're going to have to go through fairly quickly. And I just want to mention, Mike, that the next one was also from the same, there you go, from the same yard, I think, or from the same submitter. And so what do you think, Mike?
Yeah, this likewise looks like a herbicide damage situation. This one looks a little bit more like it might be some kind of a synthetic auxin, but again, I'm not the expert in that area. But both of these cases look, especially the first one, but this one too, suspicious for that. So just have to kind of give it time for any branches that have actually died out. The cambium's dead, prune those out, but these things can be slow to recover from. So just TLC and time.
Okay, so let's move on to the next one. I don't know why it's going so slow. Don't even know if it's moving. I think, hold on. Okay, this must be the next one. Okay, so Aurelia cordata, golden Japanese spikenard from Pitt County, assuming it's an insect problem because of the chewed leaves. Plants look beautiful in late spring. But June, some critter is chewing on it. By the end of the summer, the plant looks good again, as it did in April. I'm assuming that whatever is eating it has moved on to another stage in its life cycle. I've sprayed the plant with safer soap, but didn't help. I've never seen any critter on the plant, just chewed leaves. So this is one where it does look like some kind of insect feeding damage. Chewing damage is really difficult to ID, and we would assume it's either caterpillars or beetles. In this case, I'm going to assume it's probably beetles, and I have a guess that it might be Asiatic garden beetle, but I can't confirm. And really, this is one where we would ask that you scout at different times of day and at night, because a lot of insects like to come out at night and feed. I know there was one later on that mentioned that they did scout all different times of day, but you might have to just, go out really early in the morning. Regardless, safe soap, again, we don't comment too much on control, but soaps will not affect a kind of a chewing insect. Soaps are typically for fairly immobile insects and mites like spider mites and scales and things like that, aphids that just sit there and get covered with the soap. But the soap is not really going to deter a chewing insect that lands on it, and it really won't kill an insect that's there. So again, with this, it's luckily not going to harm the plant overall. It makes it look bad, but I would definitely, once you start seeing the chewing damage each year, start scouting at different times of day and night and look for them. And once you get a culprit, that makes it easier to find a pesticide or some kind of control method. So, okay. And then, of course, this is actually one where the photo is a bit small, but obviously we can see what it's showing. So it's a rose, and they mentioned rose, crepe, myrtle, basil, many others, and that's because these are Japanese beetles. Japanese beetles do feed on a lot of different plants, hundreds of different hosts. They do love roses, grapes, but I've been seeing crepe myrtle, some other plants being attacked this year. This year was a pretty big year for them, but unfortunately, there's a lot of text here, but it's mostly about what to use for control. And I will say again that we are not experts on that. I'm not an expert on that. There are good fact sheets online for Japanese beetle control. It looks like much of the stuff we recommend, like kind of knocking them off and early in the day into a bucket of soapy water. But really, this was just a really bad year. It's kind of an uphill battle. We saw a lot of June beetles. We saw a lot of Japanese beetles. They may have made it and laid eggs, and their larvae could develop, but we don't know also what next year is going to hold and what climatic and other biological factors might knock down the populations. So, I think some typical pesticides will work, but, oftentimes the pest pressure is so big and there's so many of them that even multiple applications might not help. But this is one where, again, this is mostly a control question, so we're probably going to move on fairly quickly. Okay, Mike, do you want to read this one?
Sure. Excuse me. Carteret County, and a picture from the end of June of this year. I think this is an insect issue, although there's likely more going on here than meets the eye. Started last year as yellowing spots in the grass. This year, the yellow spots are now dead spots, and they seem to be getting larger. The white spots in the soil were found less than 4 inches in the soil, with lots of them in one shovelful. The spots under a microscope seem to show eggs of some type surrounded by white webbing.
And Mike, you have some suspicion, right?
Well, there are a couple of possibilities here. It seems to me strange, the position there relative to the road. Really, it would have been good if we would have run this by our turf diagnostician, because he would have had a better opinion about some of these because there are patch diseases. But
yeah,
are you talking about my other opinion? After
your other
yeah. Oh no, yeah. So yeah, if you use a UV filter on the photograph, it'll reveal some signs of a possible other causal agent, but that has to advance the screen in order to see that.
That's slow for some reason. I don't know what's going on here. Let's see. Come on. I don't know what's going on with this, why it's going so slowly. There we go. So yeah, so crop circles, no. Actually, this sample was submitted through our system, and actually I don't remember if these additional photos were submitted too, but this is one where, yeah, definitely submit some of that to the clinic. I can look. It does kind of look like ground pearl, young ground pearls, and the waxy kind of fluff that the adults make when they're creating eggs. But I'd have to see it in person to confirm. So this is one where, yeah, dig up some of that, send it in. I'll take a look. The turf lab will take a look, get the turf, a section of the turf that is near the leading edge of where the damage is. But I think the pathologist said that this didn't seem to look like a disease per se. So it is a strange pattern, but it's not, it could just be where those ground pearls rest, settled down to infest the area and are kind of creeping out. But I would have to see that up close to in person to confirm that that's what those are. Okay, so Mitchell County, Western North Carolina, identify an insect. Is it a cicada killer? Last spring and this spring, this insect began appearing 1 or 2 daily in my house near windows. I assume because it was trying to find a way out. They did not seem aggressive. I've not been able to identify a nest or entry point. So yes, so this is, it's not a cicada killer, but it is a yellow jacket. This is Vespula vidua. I had to look it up because it's not one I recognize. It's not a fairly common one, but this is probably a queen yellow jacket. And when you mentioned that they're every spring you see them inside going toward the windows, that is a good sign that they obviously got into the house some way in the fall, the previous fall, were hibernating, the mated queens were, and then they wake up in the spring looking to get outside to start a new nest. They're typically not aggressive at this point. They can be let go. This is a native species. It's not a very common one that I know of. And also this one apparently is one that does not go after meat. It'll go after live insect prey, but it won't be like one of those ones that comes after picnics or whatnot. So these are probably fine to just let go, let outside. If you feel strongly against, you're afraid of them a lot, you can obviously spray them or kill them in some other way. But it's really just a mated queen that's looking to get outside, get out of the house after her long hibernation. Okay, Mike, you want to read this one?
Sure. I feel like I want to do like a real estate thing here. Next to this beautiful waterside property, a sunroom looking out over the dock. Genus citrus, and was a hybrid here, Pamlico County, lemon tree. Picture from mid-July. About 1 month. The problem is notice change in leaf texture from smooth and soft to textured, leathery, mottling, and leaves dropping off. And before I turn over to Matt, let me just mention that we very seldom see diseases on houseplants, foliar diseases, excuse me, because the home environment is so dry that it's just not favorable to fungi and bacteria. I'm not quite sure what that little scorch is here. My cursor doesn't show up on your screen, but the lower picture there, that kind of burning, I'm not sure what that might be, probably abiotic. But the main thing here is going to be in that's bailiwick.
And what Mike mentioned is key. So houses are pretty dry, and this is perfect habitat then for spider mites. And in fact, I have personal experience with this. We have Meyer lemon trees that we put out in the summer. They look beautiful all summer. When we bring them in for the winter, they get outbreaks of spider mites. And the spider mites love dry conditions. When it's moist outside, there's fungi that kill them. There's predators, things like that. Inside the home, this is classic spider mite damage with all the little stipple marks everywhere. Luckily, the plants will recover. We've had that happen a few times where it's severe damage. We often, when we bring them in for the winter, we spray them every other week for a couple weeks with some soap, some insecticidal soap. That seems to work really well. It kills whatever mites are coming in on the plants, and then even though it's dry in the winter, they won't recover, and you usually get kind of nice growth still. You put it back out in the summer, it's still beautiful. But yep, this is a mite issue and very common on citrus. And look on the undersides of leaves, which that's another thing. When you're sending in photos, it's good to always put photos of the undersides of the leaves. And we might even be able to have seen some webbing or some of these are going to be little red mites in this case, because it's typically going to be citrus spider mite or something close related. So yep, that's a spider mite issue. Okay, next one. NASA holly attenuata, Ilex attenuata from Wake County. Witch's broom on NASA holly, just noticed this past week. So I'm gonna let Mike say something about this.
Well, I don't have much to say. I didn't even know the plant. I had to look it up, but there are photos online from the Ralston Arboretum of this particular holly. Yeah, there are a couple of things that can cause witch's broom like this, and I am not sure what the situation is. So I really can't say much. If it continues to be a problem, then consider sending it on into us. And, especially if the new developing growth continues to show that symptom after these brooms have been pruned out.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Okay. All right, Zelkova serrata in Wake County. Not sure which problem that is. It started a couple years ago. So I will say that I did not notice what the actual problem was from these photos, except for there's a lot of lichens on the trunk. But Mike, do you have any observations?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that there are a lot of lichens there. Not necessarily a concern. Of course, lichens don't cause direct damage, but if you get a lot of them, it can be a sign that the growth is not that good on the tree or shrub. So, but the crown looks good. There is some just natural texture to the bark of this tree. It looks nice, a nice tree. We do sometimes see in our area the Zelkovas kind of fall apart, not literally physically, but they can collapse and die. I think it may be related to adaptability here, but right now I don't see too much cause for concern.
Okay, it's good to hear, I guess. But if you have other concerns, or if there's something that's not being shown in this photo, please do submit it to us. You can always submit it to our system, and we can take a look at those from the images. Oh, I just noticed, it looks like one of the trunks here has been cut.
Oh, yeah.
But these are things we miss sometimes. We're trying to look our hardest at these photos, but sometimes like a one of those finding games where we're trying to find what's going on. So okay, whoop, sorry. Okay.
Camellia, Moore
Go ahead, Mike.
County, mid-July, with the suspicion that it's a disease plant. Age is approximately 15 years. We have lived here 5 years and has been full with greenery and blooms. Notes that losing leaves and leaf discoloration mid-June 2023. So this, you notice that the purple discoloration is, it's hard to explain. There's a certain uniformity to it. I know it's not the whole leaf, but there's a certain uniformity to it that doesn't, to me, suggest any kind of disease. Also notice how the veins stayed green. My first suspicion in this case, and it's only a suspicion, is that there's a nutrient problem going on. So my first recommendation would be to take some soil, have a soil test done, maybe on the form 82, the diagnostic or problem test, and then and see what that tells you. So maybe after 15 years it needs some nutrition. I don't know if it's been getting that or not, but that would be my first take on this one.
Yeah, and it looks a little bit thin up here and a little bit chlorotic and yellow here, which would lend to that too. That's what I was thinking as well. It's some kind of soil issue or something. So yeah.
Yeah, and
okay.
I don't know what those containers are on
Yeah.
the ground. They look like they have some kind of a liquid in them, but yeah, it doesn't look like any kind of a. Anyway, I would just start out with a soil test and see what kind of things need to be done as far as nutrition.
Yeah. And that's, again, we're looking at all the clues everywhere. That's why I leave as much of the photo in these slides as possible. Okay, so next one, if we can get there. Okay.
All right. A bald cypress, New Hanover County, mid-July again, stress dying, 13 years old, browning from top to 1/3 down in one section, beginning in April of this year and progressing further down around the tree. One bagworm removed, kind of doubt that the bagworm was doing it. No mites observed, possible root girdling. I mixed the slides up a little here. I mean,
yeah,
change them up a little so that we can address the root situation in a moment. But the pattern of the browning on these needles, to me, doesn't suggest a foliar disease. It suggests some kind of a problem lower down. And notice though that the base of the trunk visible on the photo on the left You do see there is a root flare there, so that's good. Doesn't look like it was planted too deeply, which can be one of the factors that makes the girling roots worse. Go ahead to the next slide though, Matt.
Yeah, and before we move on, there is a tiny area of phyid mite that does cause kind of bronzing and distorted needles on bald cypress, but this doesn't look like it either. And typically it wouldn't harm a healthy tree. It would cause a little bit of damage here and there, but would not cause the dieback and whatnot that you're seeing here. So on to the next slide then, or the next part.
Yeah, so the person who submitted was concerned about possible girdling roots. There's a little bit of that you can see there. I worried more about what, so you don't see the root flare here. It almost goes straight into the ground, and even maybe a little bit of hint of what we call, or they call, elephant footing. But yeah, I don't see enough there to really blame that. But what I do see is an extremely sandy soil. And I don't know how the tree did. Well, we've seen these things planted on upland sites and do quite well here on campus. There's some that have been around a long time and doing nicely. But that sandy soil was kind of a red flag to me. And also, I would, if we had the opportunity to dialogue, ask about that water in the background there. If that is here in New Hanover County, is that a freshwater type pond, or is that a salt or brackish water? Because this tree does have some sensitivity. I was looking it up in the Silvex manual to salt intrusion. So that would be one thing to investigate there as a possibility. So don't have a good conclusion, but a couple of things to look into.
Thanks, Mike.
And then looks like it may be in the same landscape setting, corkscrew willow. Here we have to look a little bit more broadly, maybe that same question about water, maybe roots getting down into a salt intruded area, just, something to look into, but also think about some cankers here. It's a good opportunity to remind people that when you are submitting physical samples from trees and shrubs, be sure and include that transition zone. So you work down and you see, okay, it's dead, it's dead, it's dead, because you're checking the cambium just under the bark, and then you see it's alive. That transition zone is what you want to capture. So I can't rule out that there wasn't a canker here involved, but those are oftentimes problems on either stressed or injured trees.
Yeah, there's a lot of lichens on it too, as well. And I want to, even though it's kind of in the sun, but okay. Thanks, Mike. Oh, sorry, you had
Yeah, I don't have any much to say there, except that those foliar symptoms again don't look like a disease to me.
there's some
The tip
cracks,
there.
and there's some cracks
Yes.
and swelling here.
That does look more like the possibility of a canker, that would be a perfect section, right where the photo is cut at the top and the bottom. That would be a good section to include if the homeowner were planning on pruning out that large section to see if. But again, even if there is a canker there, it may be taking advantage of a tree that's under some kind of stress.
Okay, I had to look up this cardoon, but Globe artichoke in Union County, plant with insect problem. In early July, I noticed the leaves turning brown. Most of the leaves are now brown. Cluster of this bug are on the spent flowers, but there are small bugs or maybe eggs on the undersides of the leaves. So let me just address the insects right now. Should say the insects in the room. So we have here is these are young leaf-footed bugs or leaf-footed bug nymphs. So leptoglossus. Here are some older ones on a thistle up in the mountains. They are at the flowers probably to feed on the seeds. And so at this point, they're not really harming the plant. They're kind of feeding on the seeds. Unless you're collecting the seeds to plant something, then they're really not harming the economical kind of part or the things that you like. This little thing right here, I had to zoom in, is actually a common tree hopper, a membracid called Antilia, and they very commonly feed on asters. But neither of them would cause the damage that you're seeing in those. So let me go back to uncover those. And Mike, do you have any ideas on what might be happening?
I don't have any good ideas. No, this is another case where It doesn't look like a foliar disease to me in comparison with the next picture of the same host we got submitted by someone else. I did see on the plant toolbox in the video there that this plant has kind of a transition, it sounds like, between what it does in the spring and then the summer and the fall. So I'm wondering if there might be some natural senescence going on, but I don't know the plant really to speak to that with any kind of authority. I just would say that it does not look like a foliar disease to me. This would be something to monitor and make sure that it does kind of recover in the fall with that next flush.
And then, as you mentioned, here's another artichoke. In new potting soil, only organic fertilizer added when planted in June, full sun, disease suspected, has no organisms observed, older leaf spots, then black and die. So you can see up here close the blackening and the spots. Looks like some of the new growth looks all right. But what do you think, Mike, again?
Yeah, it's hard to be sure, but the pattern there of actual well-defined spots, sometimes you can get that with abiotic factors, but that is one that you would want to at least consider the possibility there could be a fungal leaf spot. Also, the pattern being on the lowest leaves first and new growth coming out is okay. Those are kind of pointers that it may be a foliar disease, although I'm not sure which ones it would be on this particular host. So yeah, that would be something to look at as far as a physical sample if they were seeing enough damage to be concerned about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So an Amsonia hubrichti, Arkansas Blue Star, Chatham County, mid-July. Chatham County. I wonder if this is Charlotte's. Anyway, don't answer that, Charlotte. Unsure, suspect disease or abiotic. Symptoms started at the beginning of the growing season and persisted through the summer, stunting around 18 inches high across instead of 3 to 4. So a question there I would want to ask would be, how long has the plant been in the landscape? Has it performed well in the past and is now doing this, or the expectation of the size, is that based on past experience or just what you know about the plant? Definitely there's some yellowing here, those leaf tips, the dead shoots that didn't develop at the crown level there, not the old flower stalks that are dead, but I noticed that there were some what looked like new growth that had started to come out and then just blackened at the tips. Don't know what that would be. But it says the crown is sound, so if that appears to be the case, this would be another one where you would want to look at possible soil factors, although the fact that the other Amsonias are doing well, that phlox in the background looks like it's doing well. This is a hard one. There could be some kind of a root rot going on that's causing the stress and the yellowing and browning. This one would require a physical sample to check both the soil and the roots. So the fact that it's just this one that's doing poorly, especially if there were other same species that were doing all right, but even just the fact that the other Amsonias are doing all right, yeah, I would be wanting to look at a physical sample on this one.
Hey, we got a Baptisia, Carolina Moonlight, and from Chatham County. Disease is assumed. Symptoms first noticed early June and have become more severe since then. Zonal necrotic V-shaped lesions that start at the leaf tips and move inward. Chlorosis, especially of the new growth. 100% of the foliage affected on one plant. Different varieties growing adjacent to this plant range from showing no to moderate symptoms. And this variety is the most affected cultivar. So I think you modified this one too, right?
I did a little bit. Because I wanted to comment on the pattern here. So you notice that the browning is occurring on a lot of different parts of the plant, but even on the very newest growth there up at the top, which doesn't fit that pattern that you would expect fungal and bacterial diseases to start lower down toward the inside of the plant perhaps and kind of work their way out and up. So it doesn't look like that Go ahead to the next slide, where it's a close-up of the tips. Even though that type of necrosis there and that pattern of a little bit banding or concentric ring pattern, and that makes you think disease, but just the fact that it's always only on the tips, that it's on very young developing shoots, doesn't look like a virus symptom, and I don't know of any viruses on Baptisia. We had one suspected a couple of years ago, but there are none actually listed in the literature that I know of when I checked then. So yeah, it doesn't look right for virus anyway. So this again is going to be either a root or soil problem of some kind. I would feel fairly confident, but what exactly, that's hard to say.
All right, on potato and red beet plants, Carteret County, plant with an insect problem. Caterpillar rate on the neck, the caterpillars, I think, ate the next tops and went on to the potatoes, leaving little more than the skeleton of red beet leaves. This happened over a few days. Okay, so there are actually two insects in this picture, and I don't know if anybody can spot the second one. I mean, the first one's fairly obvious, but the second one is right here. And so what we have here, I'll mention the minor pests. This is the flea beetle, probably tobacco flea beetle, something like that, one of the Epitrix. And they would be creating these little shot holes in the leaves. They're very common in solanaceous crops. There's a few species that feed on, potato, eggplant, tomato, things like that. But of course, the big concern is this caterpillar right here. These stripes with the big kind of velvety black patches, especially on the side of the abdomen or side of the thorax right here. And this red head is pretty diagnostic for southern armyworm or perhaps yellow striped armyworm, but I think this is a southern armyworm. And basically, both are fairly similar. They're typical armyworm. They're typical mid-season, midsummer, late summer kind of pest of various crops. They feed on all different ones. I find them on tomatoes every once in a while in our garden, and they can do a lot of damage in, if they're smaller plants or there's a lot of them there. Typically they're a little bit more sporadic, but this is one you can look up information on southern armyworm or yellow striped armyworm in the garden. And they're going to have similar control to typical caterpillars, but early scouting, especially for plants that are valuable, you really want to keep going. Early scouting for these things can be really important. Again, scouting at different times of day. You can hand remove them too, just to reduce the chemicals. But once there's a lot of them and they're doing a lot more damage, you may have to resolve it with chemicals. But yep, southern armyworm, almost certainly, possibly yellow striped armyworm, but I think it's southern armyworm.
So before I mention this one, I just want to take note of the fact that we are at about the halfway point of the program today. I don't know how, Matt, you're doing on the slides, how many are left, but just wanted to mention.
I'm not sure. I could check if we need to, but we could just start going through them a little more quickly. But I think we should be good.
So here's a case where I do think there's a disease going on. Creeping Jenny, Wake County, end of July. This creeping ground cover has a fungus, I believe, and each year it gets worse and worse and starts earlier. Started several years ago with just a few patches. Plant dies off, making brown circles of dead plant material. Lifting the dead off and looking under what is still alive, but close to dead part shows white mycelium or tendrils. And I'll think I have a close-up of that in a moment. The patchiness here, the general look of it, the fact that it's repeating in these areas does suggest some kind of a fungal, well, either fungal or oomycete, so a fungus-like organism, probably attacking the leaves and stems. And if we look at the close-up on the next slide, it made the inset there larger, and you can see how some of the leaves are partially attacked like that. And so, yeah, this, I think the white mycelium, though, that you see is actually secondary. I don't think that that is the prime culprit. I don't know that this plant gets southern blight, but that would be something maybe to look for. I do know this plant gets Rhizoctonia aerial blight, and it does get Phytophthora. So these are some things that we'd have to look for if we had a sample in the lab. But this does appear to be an actual disease that's taking out these stems in the patches. Which one I couldn't tell you without the physical sample.
I think we should be keeping track of this. We should have a tally mark of how many we can actually tell from the photos and how many we can't.
Yeah, I know I'm doing very poorly today. That was I wanted to set expectations low, but I'm.
Yeah. No worries. This is how it is, unfortunately. So, or whatever. Okay. Next one, longleaf pine, Hope County. I think it's insect, but not totally sure. Noticed white cottony infestation about a week ago on several needles of one of the 3 longleaf pines. So I'm assuming these small ones that are just growing. You can see here these and these. Okay, so Mike, do you want to mention what you were going to mention?
Well, I have that on the next slide.
Okay,
I
good.
suppose we can go ahead to do that and say what it's not. First
Yeah.
of all.
Okay, so Mike had one thought, but although actually, yeah, I wonder, but here, Mike had one thought, but
it's not that. So, yeah, one of the things that this sort of looked like at first was one of the Coleosporium needle rusts. There are fungi that alternate between pines and members of the aster family, but the shape isn't quite right. They're not quite as tongue shaped, and also you don't see any discoloration of the needles, so we can discard that. So it's not a disease.
yes, and I can't tell exactly what it is, but these structures either remind me of wax covered eggs or wax cocoon, or sorry, silken cocoons of something. There you can see, here you can see there's kind of a little less and a little darker. Honestly, I don't recognize this offhand, and that's it could be superficial, it could actually be a pest, it could be something that's just pupating up on there and from somewhere else. But this is where I'm going to say this is one where I would love to have kind of specimens in the lab so I could dissect them and look at them much more closely and see, is this just a wax covered insect? Is it an egg? Is it some other structure or a cocoon? You'd find a pupa in. I don't know. There's no discoloration. The plants look fine. They look pretty good, and the person who submitted this can also judge on whether these look good. There are these weird little things back here which I didn't know, almost look like flies or something, and like some flies here. But I really only have guesses at this point, and so really I think this would be the best thing to do, would be to submit them as physical samples. So okay, thanks for the interesting one. All right. Persea palustris, Swamp Bay in Pitt County. Old galls turn black eventually, but stay on the leaves. The new galls form late spring into summer. I have several of these trees in my backyard. All are affected and unsightly. I would like to control the critters. Causes the gall, if possible. I cut open the gall, little white dots fall out. Then I saw bigger yellow specks, which I suspect are the critters. So this is a very easy to ID insect, because the hosts, so bays and other Lauraceae, especially red bay, swamp bay, things like that, will get this insect. And this is called the red, or the swamp bay, or the bay triazid or psyllid. So it's a little sucking insect. Interestingly enough, it was named Triaza magnoliae because in the original person who described it thought this was a magnolia and misidentified the plant actually, but it's only on Lauraceae. You can actually also see a leaf miner, but that's of minimal kind of concern. These are not going to be of major concern to the actual plant. The plants have evolved with these native insects for millions of years. They can be pruned out. These branches that have the really heavy infestations can be pruned out. They can be destroyed. There are also insecticides that can be used, including systemics. And we do have a good fact sheet on this bay psyllid or bay triazid. And I will try and put the name in there so you can search in a moment. All right, so moving on.
Yeah, so you see, their map was one that you could answer. Now here's
Yeah, exactly.
and here's another one that I can't. Ilex crenata, so a compact or soft touch holly from Pitt County, end of July of this year. A 7-year-old heads, that's always good to know. I always appreciate it when we know how long the plant has been in the landscape. So if it's had a chance to become established or not. And in this case, of course, it certainly should. and that environmental conditions haven't really changed, no signs of insect damage. So we do see, well, first of all, it looks like, at first glance, you would think it might be some kind of a canker, but we don't really see those on hollies, not that it couldn't happen. More often what we are looking for are root problems, but we don't get that much Phytophthora on it, some, we don't get that much armillaria, some. We do get a lot of black root rot, which you may remember under the name of the fungus as Phalaviopsis pusicula, but now it is Burkeliomyces. I'm not sure exactly what went into that change a couple of years ago, but the black root rot, the common name, has stayed the same. So that would be one thing that we would want to look for there, as well as, you know, other root pathogens. The timing of the 7 years, that's a little bit strange. I don't know. I would be wanting to ask about some stumps and things maybe in the area. I do see a depression there with some water. I don't know if it had recently rained there or if this area maybe stays a little bit saturated. So there are more questions than answers again here, but a physical sample would be definitely the way to go to try and explore it further.
Oh, I love this one. All right.
Yeah.
So digitalis, purpurea, foxy and Pitt County from May. Plant with possible disease. So the flower stem on the left is normal. The one on the right is over 5 inches wide and flat. Looking for an answer, I found the term fasciation. I don't use any herbicides in the garden. I planted itself from seeds. Another part of my garden. Just curious if you can shed some light on why this would occur. It bloomed beautifully, just odd looking, and what a bloom as well. That's it's pretty amazing. So Mike, how do you want to comment on this?
Yep, fasciation is what this is called. The very flat ribbon-like stem, of course, is most famous on celosia, which people have selected, you know, coxcomb for that effect. We sometimes see it on sweet potato. I've seen it on squash in the vegetable garden. I don't have a good explanation for it. You don't have to invoke any kind of herbicides or anything like that. It just appears to be some kind of maybe a genetic predisposition that's triggered by some environmental factor. Hard to say, but not something you need to worry about as an infectious disease. And we have a fancy name to put on it, but I don't have a 100% good explanation.
I think it's pretty neat looking. I mean, strange, obviously, but I love how these little leaves are coming out of that kind of stem. You know, it's like a ribbon, like you said. Very cool. All right.
Solidago canadensis, Canada goldenrod, Mitchell County. Mid-July. Photos of a plant with a problem, unsure what type or even if it is a problem, growing wild in my landscape. I've lived on my mountainside property for 3 years. A lot of single stem goldenrod grows wild. Some of the plants have distorted growth near the top of the stem. The plants still flower. It doesn't seem to harm them. I cut through bulbous growth and it was hollow.
All right. So goldenrod is a native kind of, some people consider a weed. I love it because it attracts a lot of insects as flowers. It's a native aster, and because of that, it has a lot of things that like to feed on it. So there's a lot of things that mine the leaves. There are a lot of things that feed on the leaves. There are a lot of things that lay their eggs in the tissue and cause galls. And this is one of those cases. It's a really common one. It's actually from a fly. So this is the goldenrod gall fly. This is actually a photo taken by a local photographer. I actually don't have any photos of this fly. I only have photos of the galls because the galls are pretty abundant and can be seen pretty easily. They won't harm the plants. As you saw, the plants will flower, they'll grow. It looks like the vascular tissue goes right around where the fly develops, but a single larva will develop in there of this kind of chunky fly. And there's actually a true fruit fly. So this is a some of the, like the Mediterranean fruit fly, olive fruit fly, a lot of these really pest ones that feed on live plants. This is a native group that has radiated with goldenrod, and you can see this is a female, and that long, what is called an aculeus, is used to inject the eggs into the developing plant, and then the larvae, this maggot, will live inside and feed inside. But that's why it's hollow. It's probably gone already. But basically they're not going to harm the plants. The plants have evolved with these insects, and so you can leave them be, and you know, it's just part of nature out there. So yeah. Okay, hydrangea arborescens in Mitchell County in May, mid-May or late May. Plant blight question mark. So wild. I noticed that the symptoms in May almost as soon as the plant leafed out. I trimmed off the bad branches, but that didn't stop the problem. Showed up on the other leaves, and in early July, I cut the whole plant to the ground. A similar hydrangea growing beneath it survived after I cut its branches with bad leaves off. So
I'm going to punt on this one. I really don't know what would be going on. It seems that kind of distortion you do, of course. I personally think of two things at first. One would be herbicides, but that doesn't look quite right here. You see too many good leaves on it for one thing. But the other thing I think of would be some kind of critter. So I'm gonna say I don't know. Matt, what do you think?
yeah, I don't know really there aren't very many specific pests to hydrangea, and honestly I can't think of any that are specific or will cause this damage. Like, you know, some aphids and some groups of sucking insects will cause distortion in leaves and individual leaves. This one is one where it would be best to send in, say, this section right here where you have some healthier leaves and some not, and we can investigate that. I don't know if it's suspicious this next to this rock wall where I don't know what kind of runoff is happening there too. You know, from this hill, say, if there's something running off and dripping on those leaves. You know, we've had problems in the past where individual leaves were hurt by chemical sprays directly. They weren't actually herbicides that get into the plant and cause physiological damage, but they can affect individual leaves. So those are some thoughts I have, but honestly, this is a tricky one as well. And like I said, I would submit some a stem with, you know, combination of the healthy and unhealthy leaves, and I could look for mites. Again, they're not hydrangeas don't get a really a lot of pests, like insect pests. So yeah, I'd be really curious to see what it looked like in the lab.
And they only get a handful of diseases, none of which look like this. So
Yeah, and
although,
yeah.
yeah, although arborescens is not the one that we're usually looking at. We usually
I
look at
know
Microphylla.
that was another thing I was going to say is that this is a different species, so who knows if it does have some pests that I don't know of, because it's not the one we get in commonly here in the lab. But yeah, this is an intriguing one. And yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about it.
Very interesting one. So Ligustrum, Moore County, coming back eastward here. Spots on leaves, not sure if insect disease, not sure specifics. Appeared this summer. Plants are trimmed as a hedge, and a nice looking hedge it is. This is almost surely one of the what we call Cercospora leaf spots, although there are multiple fungi. I want to say 3, maybe 4, maybe, that are in that category of what we call Cercosporoid fungi. There's a Pseudocercospora, which kind of be my first guess. Maybe in a couple of CBC Pseudocercospora, but something along those lines. It'll cause a yellow spot that then turns dark, necrotic, brownish color there. Not black, but brown color, but retains that yellow halo, the chlorotic halo. It's possible that some defoliation could occur. But I'm not sure. Usually this is something that people don't notice until other trees have dropped their leaves and people are paying more attention to the poor ligustrums, and then they start to notice that the lower leaves especially have some of these spots and some of these yellowing and some defoliation. So this is just something I would monitor, not trying to do anything about. It's a little bit more concerning that the lower photo there, where some of the leaves have come out very small, smaller than normal, that something else might be going on, but I would just kind of take a wait and see, monitor kind of approach on this. Also, I don't know what that gap is all about. It looks like there's a gap in the hedge where that shadow is cast. Yeah, I would have more questions there as well.
Okay, Fraxinus americana, white or American ash, New Hanover County in August, the beginning of August. I recently read a report about the emerald green ash borer. I have an ash tree and took a look at it, and there was a spike split in the bark just above the limbs in several locations, which was cause for question. I believe it is. I noticed it today, not a critter. So this one, now there is the emerald ash borer is an introduced metallic wood boring beetle that does attack healthy ash trees and will kill them. However, the symptoms you're seeing here are not strictly what I would say for emerald ash borer. Also, it looks like the diameter of the trunk is very small, and I don't know that they really attack very small trees. I don't see any, basically with the emerald ash borer, you will see some cracking in the bark of plants that have it. You'll see a lot of dieback in the crown. So if you're seeing a lot of dieback and twigs in there, but you would also see loose bark and bark, you oftentimes see over time the D-shaped exit holes of the beetles when they emerge. This appears to be something else going on. These strange symptoms, and it looks like some kind of abiotic or growth issue here. And it would have been nice to see, these are really nice green leaves here, but I don't know what the whole canopy looks like. So that would be one suggestion later on, is to take a photo of the whole tree in the site, not just the close-ups of it, because we want to see everything around it. We also want to see especially at this time of year when we should expect it to be really nice, full and green, we should see a nice green canopy that's full, that doesn't have a lot of twig dieback. Those are going to be signs that we're going to look for overall health. Mike, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, those splits, I've never seen anything like that I can remember. It doesn't look like a disease. It looks like something more physiological, but I can't say much more. The roughness on the bark on the right there, that I also don't know, but one thing you have to keep in mind is eventually these trees, well, not all trees, some retain a smooth bark, but many of them, like the ashes, will develop that furrowed bark as they mature. So I kind of wonder if maybe this is just the transition to the more mature bark morphology, but I can't say for sure. Like Matt says, though, the leaves that we see look green. It would be nice to have the picture of the whole tree in its setting, and as usual, it'd be nice to have a picture of the very base where it goes into the ground, things that we can tell about that. And yeah, and to know how long the tree has been planted. So I don't have a lot of good answers here, but I'm not seeing a lot that I would be too concerned about. Just another kind of monitor situation.
Yeah, and this one, I would say if the canopy is green, it looks like it's growing well, that's great. Unfortunately, because of emerald ash borer, eventually it may get attacked by them. And so that's really tough. And it can be very expensive to maintain pesticides to keep them at bay. And basically will have to be done for the life of the tree, because these insects do attack healthy trees and are unrelenting, basically, and found everywhere now in North Carolina.
And beyond. I was just
And
up
beyond.
in Minnesota,
Yeah.
and there's a whole, at the cemetery my father's buried, the whole row of ash trees at the street side that were gone, and then but one right there close to his gravesite that had a little tag on it that they had done the treatment on it. So
Yeah, yep. Okay, moving on. Should I check where we're at? Because
I think the rest are going to go pretty quickly. But
okay, cool. Okay.
So bush bean, Scotland County, August 1st. Suspected disease problem started about 4 weeks after the seeds had sprouted. Yellowing bottom leaves, also speckled upper leaves, and eventually withering of stems and leaves. So I don't see the speckling here. This does not look like a disease to me. Certainly not a foliar disease, but I doubt that it's even a
There's
root
some
disease.
speckling down here, by the way. That's
yes, okay,
yeah.
I see that there. So that could be some fungal leaf spotting going on there. The first thing I would want to know here was, could it have been over fertilized? This might be like an over fertilizing situation. I assume that those black hoses there are part of an irrigation system. This is just a wild thought. I don't know, being black like that, if they're absorbing a lot of heat, and maybe this is really wild speculation, just thought that occurred to me now. Could there be some extremely hot water hitting those plants when the irrigation is first turned on. I don't know, but my earlier thought was maybe something along the lines of high soluble salts from over fertilization or from some kind of particularly hot additive that was put in the soil, but it doesn't look like that would be the case here. So yeah, first things to look at here would be those, and just whether it's getting enough water in general, because it's 4 weeks after. But it doesn't say when it was planted, but that's a fairly small bean plant for the 1st of August.
Okay, Solidago, lemon lime, I think, from Wake County. Solidago with yellow splotches started in early July. I have done nothing because I'm not sure what it is. Okay, so this is also, so Solidago is another goldenrod. This is pretty classic bug damage. Now, in general, I will say also, I realized later on that there's some nice spittle masses up here. So you got some spittle bugs on there, probably meadow spittle bug, but I don't know exactly which type, but they're not going to really harm the plant that much. They usually feed on the stem and the spittle mass and don't really cause a lot of harm. But all these little yellow stipples and spots are from some other kind of sucking insect, or perhaps a mite. But in this case, it's a little tough to say. So here's one where I would have loved to see the undersides of some of the leaves. You also have some chewing damage, I just noticed here, which is fairly common on Solidago. But the underside of the leaves, there is a lace bug that gets on asters that may be present. But honestly, I think because there's a lack of fecal material, there's no black fecal spots or anything like that, and it's hit so hard, I have a feeling this is from leafhoppers. And it's a young plant, it looks like, so it's going to be more severely affected, especially if it's kind of not in the area with a lot of other plants. They're going to be attracted to maybe that plant more. But these are just guesses. Leafhoppers are a possibility. There's other types of sucking bugs that will cause those stippling damage, the stippling spots. But my guess is going to be leafhoppers. Could be some other bug, and then you've got some spittle bugs here. All of which just scouting early. If they were healthy before and then they over time get these spots more and more abundant, that's probably going to be the leafhoppers. Especially the leaves look normal otherwise, but you've got these little tiny kind of white stars where they've sucked out the color, basically. Okay.
And will those hang out on that particular plant? So if the gardener here would go and kind of disturb the stems a little bit, would they flitter off?
They might, yes. So they might be hanging out. The leafhoppers are going to be really erratic. They land on the plant, they feed on it, they kind of hop around. They'll go on the undersides of leaves when you approach sometimes. So if you approach slowly and see little kind of elongate bugs on it, and they're very quick to fly or jump off when you go near, or if you shake it and you see a lot of them kind of flittering off, that's probably what they are. Lace bugs would be they're not going to be very mobile. They're going to be kind of hanging out on the undersides of leaves. This damage looks a little bit too widespread to be lace bugs, I would think. I think this is probably going to be leafhoppers, which by this time in the summer, they fed a lot on it. So gradually kind of happens. And then you notice, okay, my plant is kind of completely covered by these things. And that happens to like rosemary and a lot of herbs and things like that over the year too. Okay.
Arborvitae, Haywood County, so back out to the mountains. Earlier this month, for the past 2 years, these 23-year-old arborvitae have developed what I believe is winter burn. Both winters have been mild and the plants are along a driveway on one side and mature woods on the other side. Mature wood side is the side subject to the most damage. They recover somewhat during the course of the summer, more so last summer than this summer. Aside from acidic 10-10-10, what else can I do? During the past 2 mild winters, heavy browning, which mostly turns green again over the course of the summer. No signs of pest webbing or symptoms other than browning. So, first of all, I don't think this is arborvitae. From the picture, it looks more like Leyland cypress to me than arborvitae, but I can't say 100%. Either way, we do have a phenomenon whereby the older needles can just brown out with the shading and growth, and the fact that it's more of a problem on the wooded side than on the open side, that might suggest that that is what's going on. There's just some shading, and the plants are gonna shed the ones that are not providing enough photosynthesis, or I don't know exactly how the physiology works there, but the plant may be doing that. Does not look like a disease to me. I don't know, Matt, if any of your 8-legged friends would do that, but
Yeah, so yeah, spruce spider mites may bronze a tree like this. It starts to create like the dull green, the greens will dull, they'll look a little greasy, and then bronzing will happen. That's something where you'd have to look closely with the hand lens and see if you can see the infestation, or send it in to me. But I don't see them normally, unless there's some special situation with the plant's stressed or something like that, being so abundant that they kind of completely do that very evenly over a lot of trees. But it is a possibility.
and would those be more just on the lower branches as well? Because the internal browning that I'm talking about would be kind of lower in the canopy. And I'm having a hard time actually seeing which are the trees. I think I see one there. Just on the corner of
that's
the
another
photo,
thing is
but
that I
some
was
of those
having
are-
trouble with that too when I saw the photos, that I'm assuming it's these trees right here back in this row, but one intermediate picture would have been better, I think, too. So you have this close up, you have the situation, which is nice, but say the whole plant in a photo would be nice, so that we can see the distribution of those brown needles, and whether there's a lot of green at the tips and that they're shading out or whatnot. So that might be one suggestion I have for this. But unfortunately, we don't have a specific answer for this. This would be something that it might be worthwhile to send in some branches, especially showing where you have green and then some bronzing, so we could look at the variation between those. And I don't know, Mike, I don't know if a roots and soil it'd be nice to have anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, those should always be included. Why spend twice on postage? But it doesn't look to me, unless it's a nutritional kind of
Yeah.
thing, it doesn't look like a disease.
Okay. All right, let's keep moving. Okay, we got a Gordlinia grandiflora. So we tried to plant one of these in my yard. I think this is that hybrid thing, and it didn't survive. But yours did. Yours survived. But the plant with an insect problem, the damage on the leaves started about a month ago when the buds first appeared. There's no damage, but as the plant bloomed, small holes appeared after the bloom opened. I've not seen the insect. Looked at different times of day, night. Have not noticed anything, but the holes haven't found the culprit. So this is the sample I was referring. This is the one I was referring to, where yes, they did a good job looking at different times, day and night. I would say, maybe you might try going out more than once, but the other thing is too, if you really have a plant that you have problems with in 1 year, and this should not harm the tree or the plant will be fine next year. But once you do start seeing that damage, if you are kind of aware of it, to go start looking then, because what happens is the insects may be gone by now. They may have done their life cycle, and you have the damage, and you may have just noticed it, and the insects are gone and not actually feeding anymore. Taking looks at new growth or certain branches that are unaffected and monitoring them every day, and just seeing if you're seeing that damage, that can lead you to know whether there's activity or not. Current activity. Luckily, I don't know much about this host as far as what would feed on it. That's the problem. It looks typically, the looks remind me of beetles, some kind of leaf beetle or some other kind of beetle, perhaps weevils, but I can't be sure and certain. But luckily, the tree should be fine. It won't get harmed by this little feeding. But if you do find out what it is, we'd love to know.
Yeah, pretty little tree.
Yeah. I'm sad mine died before it even got started. Okay.
Tulip trees, Leerdon and Tulipifera, Wake County, beginning of August. Plant with a disease issue? ? Several trees in a row in the parking lot of the NC Museum of Art in Raleigh. Noticed last week, August 1st. Not sure how long it's been going on, but trees not far away are not yet affected. seem to be progressing down a line of about 8 trees. These are mature trees, approximately 15 years old. On the lower branches, leaves start to have downward facing curling. It slowly proceeds upwards. For the time being, the leaves in the upper canopy are not yet affected. Upper surface of leaf has a black lesion with a yellow halo. Could this be anthracnose? Underside of leaf has what might be light tan colored critter in the photo. And I think this is an interesting case because I think we have more than one thing going on here. I'm going to let Matt go first. I may actually, this would be one of those rare cases where he and I have a difference of opinion, but Matt, go ahead and start, and then I'll do my
Well, I
spiel
would
and add my
I
picture.
would say for one thing, tulip poplars should not be growing in a parking lot or near a parking lot, really. It's for the age of it, it should probably be bigger, a bit bigger. So it's probably already has some stress going on. So that's one thing. The other thing is that these little kind of tan critters are probably old parasitized aphids, and tulip poplars get tulip poplar aphid very commonly and readily, which will also cause some of this black spotting after they're gone and they fed and all that stuff and they're gone, and then there's some black patches, sometimes diffuse black patches on the undersides of leaves. And you can see actually the pattern right here. These 4 spots correspond to these 4 spots right here. So that may be all kind of aphid, late stage aphid damage. The aphids are already gone by now. But the aphids and scales on tulip poplar are super common and are exacerbated by stress trees as well. So Mike, what do you have to say?
Well, I would. Oh, sorry.
And they create a lot of honeydew, which does cause sooty mold. So black, if things are black, if surfaces are black and around there, or the leaf veins are black on those leaves, that's typically sooty molds growing on the abundant aphid and scale honeydew.
See, that would be, and I was going to go there too, but that would be more on the upper surface of the leaves where the honeydew would drip down. That kind of flecking modeling on the underside there reminds me of, although I'd have to have a better picture or a physical sample, or I'd have to go out to the museum, which has been a while. Maybe we should go. The next slide, though, you see one from here on campus where that's actually a very strange manifestation of powdery mildew that happens on this particular host. It doesn't look quite the same as the photo there, but that's something that I would want to look at with a hand lens. It can be pretty hard to see on this host. You see also the aphids there and the shed skins of the aphids on that leaf. But there seems to be some kind of a reaction where some of the host cells are dying as the powdery mildew colony is expanding there. So that's another thing that I would look for on this particular one. And also it would have been good to have, again, as usual, the picture of the whole canopy or whole crown of the tree, as well as one of the base of the main stem, even though the concern here was for the leaves themselves.
Okay, plum tree, Prunus domestica, Mecklenburg County from early August. Infected, would like to understand the problem and if the tree can be saved. Sap on bark, leaves are brown and brittle, stems are not still green. Tree is part of an orchard established in 2016. There are peach, apple, fig, persimmon, and Asian pears. The orchard gets full sun. The trees were sprayed twice prior to fruit setting with bromide. The tree began showing symptoms in the last month. Photos of the tree. So.
Yeah, the only question I can answer here is that the prognosis is not good. Prunus sometimes do struggle in North Carolina. I don't see, and the main disease we see on plum is black knot, and I don't really see that here. But it's very interesting that the lower portion of that tree is just suddenly so much smaller than the upper part, so that it had some kind of damage or something girdling it there. Can't say a canker or not, but yeah, I would say the prognosis for this tree is as close to 0 as you can get.
I just noticed that too, Mike, that it's you can see how much thicker it is. Of course, there's perspective here, but it's much thicker above this area, and the bark is different texture, all that stuff. And then there's this this mat right around here. I don't know if that's necessarily affecting it, but there's just, prunus don't do well in North Carolina anyway. I feel like now Mecklenburg, you're getting out west a little bit more. It's a little cooler, but I find that prunus are just not happy, especially the plums and those types of tree prunus.
A quick comment on the spray there. I'm not sure what bromide is, but it is good that there's a spray program. I see the trees in the background there look quite good. I don't know if that's a peach there, what other trees those are, but they seem to be doing quite well. But unless you have a pretty high tolerance for disease and insect damage to the fruit, yeah, if you're trying to grow large fruit in North Carolina, you're going to need to be on a good spray program. And there's a recently revised note about that for home orchards on the NC State website.
Okay.
Laurus nobilis, Bay Laurel, Johnston County, suspect disease but not sure. 1 year ago, twisted new leaves, stunted growth, brown spots on some leaves, and I guess it appeared again this year. Does not look like a disease to me. Doesn't look like a situation where it would be herbicide, unless you'd have to look at kind of record of applications and things, but that's not something that might be my first suspicion here necessarily. But again, I'm not the expert in that area. I would, of course, if I were getting a physical sample of this, immediately run over to Matt and put it under his microscope, or rather ask him to see if there's any indication of, well, I'll let him say.
Yeah. I mean, we might search, I would definitely search for broad mites or some kind of mite that might be causing that witch's broom and that distortion. It could also, there's some thrips that cause damage, but it's not quite like the damage I would expect from them. And even that is just strange. I mean, if Mike uses other lines of evidence for herbicide damage, but I guess if I were to see it, and my first gut reaction would be some kind of herbicide or chemical damage, just because of the distorted new growth. But this is definitely one where I'd want to look for very, very tiny mites that you might be able to see with your own hand lenses there, but honestly are so tiny that it's probably best to just submit the samples. Taking one of these branches below the area where you're seeing this new growth, where you get some of the old growth too, would be helpful. But it's very strange, and just not quite sure. Again, lots of things can mimic these similar symptoms, so that's why we need to have typically a physical sample to look for these things, or at least rule out the biological ones, and then maybe infer some of the other like chemical and environmental things.
And another, when Matt talks about lines of evidence, one thing to always look for when you're suspecting some kind of a chemical injury, whether it be herbicide or something else, how many species are affected. Now, of course, there's going to be variability and susceptibility, but if you've got a bunch of different kinds of plants, let's say a bunch of different dicots at least in an area, look around and see, well, how do they look? Things that might be with roots in the same area that might have taken up the same product or been subject to the same drift or something, to see if you do have any evidence of it on other kinds of plants. That would be one of the things to investigate. But I don't know, my gut here is, I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm gonna have to say.
Yeah, it's tough. We don't want to say anything for sure, because it's without looking at under scope or doing some tests on it, it would all be guesses. So.
Hydrangea, oak leaf hydrangea this time from Mecklenburg again, and the brown patches. The symptoms started last summer and continued throughout the growing season. They returned this summer. I saw no signs of pest or pathogen symptoms, large brown patches on the plant leaves. Again, I guess speculation, but my hunch is that this is just a type of wilting or drought or heat type symptom that if the plants, it's shaded in this particular moment, but I've seen the regular Hydrangea macrophylla do something similar when they don't get enough water, they're getting too much sun and heat at a certain time of the day. So that would be my first guess here. rather than any kind of a disease, or certainly rather than any kind of insect.
And I guess what I thought too, since it's so close to the house and things like that, and that hose, I've seen damage similar to this where it's chemical damage, not actually herbicide, but some kind of cleaner or some kind of product that burns, that falls on the leaves and burns them a bit. So that's the only other kind of guess that I would have, because there's so many nice pristine leaves, and then you got these little kind of patches where it's affecting that. Now, of course, Mike has a lot more experience with those types of symptoms on hydrangeas, so I would say first is go by his diagnosis. But I've had plants before when we had a deck cleaned and things like that, where the overspray of the chemicals landing on the plants burns them in a kind of erratic and strange pattern like this. So that would be just my plug for another thing that might be possible, but
But
Mike
there
could
too,
probably tell me why it's wrong.
look at the hostas, look at the other things there. Are
Yeah.
you seeing that same kind of damage, or is it restricted to hydrangea?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's.
Yep. And actually, it looks like it's more at the tip, at the top. It's hard to tell where these photos align, but it looks like the top is where that's happening. The rest of the hydrangea looks good. So,
It does.
okay. So believe Mike, he's smarter than me anyway. So
It's all speculation on my part.
yeah. Okay. I don't know how many more of these we have. Let's see. I think we're getting to the
This
end.
is the last one.
Oh,
I think-
good.
I
The
think,
last one
yeah.
then, I think, or maybe. Well, don't quote us on that, but. So Lychnis coronata, orange sherbet, Wake County from late July. So poor plant health, overall lack of flowering, not sure if disease or insect, lack of growth. Flowering looks like cercospora or sunburned, just poor overall health, looked healthy in spring. So yes. So I don't know this host, and I think Mike mentioned doesn't know this host.
I don't
either.
know it either, and there may be a few spots that there could be some kind of a fungal leaf spot, but that just general shriveling up of the older leaves, the kind of, unless that pale green is supposed to be what it looks like, I think it could be a situation where there's either a soil problem, or maybe the roots aren't healthy and the plant is not able to take up enough water and nutrients, and that's why it's doing this. But I don't know.
Yeah, this also would be one I would wonder, when was it planted? If it was planted and it was and say it dried out the roots or something, or it I don't know how big it was when it was planted, but it looks like it just is kind of poor growth. It's very small. I would suspect something in the soil, or some kind of perhaps it wasn't watered enough before it was, or even overwatered when it was planted. But that's another detail, again, to include when you submit samples and send photos, is when was it purchased, say, where was it purchased, and then when was it installed in the landscape, or was it planted seed, things like that, and then how long has it been? So those are kind of all good questions that will lead us to knowing what might be some kind of clues. So, okay. So Charlotte says we're on 35. Let's see. So we have one more. Let's see. I don't know if we have. Nope. That's it. That's it all. That's all.
Told
That's
you.
all, folks. So
All
I'm gonna
right,
stop sharing.
excellent.
Good. Actually, a perfect amount of time. And thank you all for your submissions. Really great photos in general. There, a couple of things we want to kind of harp on again is, knowing, showing the canopy or showing the whole plant in a photo is really good. Showing the base of the plant, especially trees, is really good. All those can help us kind of determine a more kind of overall aspects of the planting, of the overall health of the plant. And can really add to even just a couple more photos, and a few of those would have helped a lot. But again, as you heard as well, a lot of these situations or these issues can't be determined from photos alone. And it's unfortunate. I wish we could just look at photos and be done with it. But there are a lot of things that you're going to need to send in. And if you ever have questions, so it looks like Caroline and Charlotte put it through the, or I guess that's Caroline, through the link into how to submit samples. And please follow those instructions. But if you have questions before you sample or send in anything that might not be helpful, you can always reach out to us, and we'll tell you, even from your photos, how to sample from those.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt and Mike. I know there's a lot of compliments coming in, and especially, we learn so much about how you look at it. You're looking at the surroundings, you're thinking about the history, and we've learned a lot of accessory things. Even if we didn't know what it was, you couldn't answer what exactly it was. We've learned a lot. So thank you for all the preparation that you put into this every August for us.
Well, we
Sure.
love having all these things supplied to us, because it's less work for us, although it's fun, and it's fun to look at them and kind of just speak about, to be able to discuss these things over this session, because as you see in some of the comments, that these are we're trying to kind of tell you what we're thinking when we look at these things. And so hopefully it's helpful, and we really love all the good photos, and hopefully you had fun out there looking, practicing, you taking your photos, and hopefully your plants aren't suffering too bad, and hopefully we can help if needed be. So
Yes, no, you guys are a wonderful resource. Thank you. All right, I'm going to wrap us up with some Master Gardener announcements. So a couple of things are coming up very soon. Wanted to just make you aware of, if you can take advantage of them. JCRA, the JC Ralston Arboretum, is hosting their Intro to Gardening in the South Symposium coming up just this next weekend on Saturday, August 26th. So this is a great webinar for yourself or someone you may know who's new to the area, new to gardening, but focusing on tips for gardening here in the South. All right, NC State, in partnership with the North Carolina Botanical Garden, offers a series of therapeutic horticulture classes. And there are 4 classes in this series, and 2 of these are beginning soon. Course 1, which is Introduction to Therapeutic Horticulture, and Course 3, which is Accommodating Diverse Populations. So both of these courses are fully online and they're at your own pace. So those are beginning soon if you would like to take advantage of those. All right, also coming up in just a couple of weeks on Saturday, September 9th, Forsyth County is hosting their annual Pawpaw Field Day at the County Office Demonstration Orchard. And as you may know, pawpaw is a native fruit, and it's actually the only tree in North Carolina that the zebra swallowtail butterfly lays its eggs on. So it's very special. And this is a free event, but they are asking that you register. So it's just a quick little registration on Eventbrite. And there's going to be a link included in the follow-up resources to do that, and also learn more about pawpaws. All right, coming up soon is a new series in the garden and landscape courses that are being taught by George Place. This one is on lawn and weeds. So starting September 18th, that is the next class. And this all leads to a certificate of mastery in garden and landscape. There's the information about that. Now, speaking of fruit trees, if you're interested in growing fruit trees and berries, we encourage you to register for this upcoming Lunch and Learn that's being hosted by Pest. That is the Center for Environmental Farming Systems. CEPS is a partnership between NC State and NCA&T and the NC Department of Agriculture and Consumer Sciences. And they conduct research, they provide extension and education in sustainable agriculture and food systems, community-based food systems. So this is coming up on September 26th, all about fruit trees and berries. Okay, we've been getting you excited for our next Learn, Grow, Share showcase. And we're going to be talking about seed libraries and how to support those in your area. We're getting very close to having a date. It's going to be in the last week of September. So very soon we will have details on that posted on the EMG internet so you can attend. And these, this whole series, the Learn, Grow, Share Showcase, these webinars are intended to be presented by Master Gardener volunteers as a way to showcase local projects. So we can learn from one another and we can make connections. So Master Gardener volunteers as well as extension agents are preparing these for you in hopes that we share with one another. And then we've got our preview of next month. Next month on September 26th, we will have a guest speaker, Chuck Bargeron, and he's from the University of Georgia from the Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health. And what he's going to talk about is this program called EDMAPS. And that stands for Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System. And what it is it's a web and smartphone-based mapping system for documenting invasive species. And so documenting the species and the invasive pests and their distribution. So where are they right now? And it's really a real-time tracking system that tracks pests locally and nationally. And it's built upon the contributions from citizens across the US. So he's going to tell us about it, tell us about how we can use it to see where things are, and even more importantly, how we can contribute to it and invite the public to contribute to it. So it's more accurate the more people that contribute, and the more we can use the information that we all share. So we invite you to join us on September 26th. That should be a very interesting program, and we are looking forward to having Chuck Barger on. And that takes us to the finish line of the August Plants, Pests, and Pathogens. We once again thank Matt and Mike for all their preparation, and we thank you for providing the content today. We had some great submissions, and we look forward to seeing you all next month when hopefully the temperatures have cooled down just a bit.